Welcome to Parenting GPS, navigating your parenting journey. I'm Kari, Kling, the host and creator of your show. And I'd like to welcome you to our very first episode of 2024. We began last year in January of 2023 and created 36 episodes last year of Parenting GPS, ranging from all kinds of topics, including family relationships, health, behavioral issues, learning, and so much more. If you haven't had a chance to look at any of those, or even just a few of them, I'd like to invite you to take a look at all of them and see which episode or episodes meets the needs of where you are with the children in your life right now. Parenting doesn't come with a manual. I say that all the time, yet so many parents feel that we're just supposed to know what to do. And we look around at other people and other families and maybe some social media and we think, they have it all together. And I don't. Well, nobody has it all together. And all of us say things sometimes that probably we could have had a better choice of words. And today's show is titled Things We Probably Shouldn't Say to Our Children and What We Can Say Instead. I am so happy and honored to introduce you to my first guest of this year, Dr. Karlene Gacita, who is a bilingual clinical psychologist and adjunct professor who's going to share with us all about this topic. And I'd like to introduce her to you now. Dr. Karlene Gacita is a bilingual clinical psychologist and adjunct professor at Austin Community College and South New Hampshire University. She has been honored to have been invited to present at multiple national conferences on topics including childhood trauma, implications of various treatments on the autism spectrum, and how attachment styles may impact early brain development. Prior to becoming a clinical psychologist, Dr. Gacita earned a bachelor's degree in elementary education and worked within the school system to become an advocate for students with special needs, including children with severe emotional disturbances. She has worked with youth and families in multiple settings, including group, private practice, inpatient units, community mental health centers, and day treatment programs. Today, Dr. Gacita has her own private practice, Healing Wings, which provides therapy services and psychological evaluations for children and adolescents. Dr. Gacita's goal is to continue supporting youth and families to help them translate their inexplicable emotions in order to connect with their loved ones and develop the skills and solutions that lead to growth. She is a military spouse, a first-time parent to an 8-month-old daughter, and dog mom of 2 female Yorkies and 1 male chocolate lab. In her free time, she enjoys going to the beach, traveling, and spending time with her family. Dr. Gacita, welcome to Parenting GPS.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to spend some time with you all and just chat a little bit about parenting and what we could do. Because like you said, it happens, they don't come with a manual. We wish they did, but parenting doesn't. So we just do our best. So I'm excited to be
Absolutely. In
here.
fact, I'm working on one. I'm working on writing one, but it'll be a while. But I talked about that, and for so many people, we fall into, we being parents, into what I call the parenting cycle, which is we parent the way we were parented because it's really all we know and it's what feels normal for us. But for parents who were parented by someone who always pointed out the negative and always said hurtful things, it's really difficult for them sometimes to find another way to communicate with their children. Would you agree with that?
I see that all the time. Parents only know what they were exposed to, what they learned. So it's kind of hard to break that cycle. It's doable, totally doable, but it is a challenge.
Absolutely. And so what we're going to do today is really focus on some terms, some phrases that people say all of the time, maybe without even acknowledging that, oh, maybe I shouldn't say that to my child. Maybe that's hurtful. And we're going to encourage people, what can they say instead? But before we get into all of those, not all, but some of those phrases, some examples, Dr. Gacita, why is it so important that we're aware of this as parents and we're really careful about the words that we say to our children?
I mean, the words that kids hear is something that eventually is something they tell themselves. So they're kind of like they hear you in the back of their head as they get older. Whatever you tell them is something that they'll eventually tell themselves when they're adults. I think communicating very nicely and effectively with kids helps them respect you, helps them feel valued, helps them learn how to talk to other people. You know, sometimes we get frustrated. Oh, they're yelling at me and they spoke to me like this, you know, but we want to model. It's very important for us to model what we want our kids to say and do. So, you know, kind of trying to maintain a positive tone with kids, even though sometimes, you know, we're like our last thread here, but trying to maintain that positive affect, positive tone with them is going to increase the chances that they're going to listen to you, you know, which is what we want, right? We want them to listen to you. And it'll build your connection with your kid even more, which is ideally what we want at the end of the day. So,
Absolutely. And one of the things as I know as a parent, personally, and also with the people that I work with, is that we have to learn sometimes how to calm down before we get to that point, right? We have to, learn our own self-regulation before we just, kind of lose it. Would you agree?
yeah, you know, we got to figure out what works for us. Count backwards, you know, just go get a glass of water, figure out what works for you as an adult, you know, as a parent, and then be able to approach the situation. Yeah,
Right.
agree with you.
And I've even felt that it was very, very positive by being honest. I know with my own children, when they were little and they were whining and crying, and it just went on and on, and I just said, you know what, mommy needs to take a break right now because I feel really tired and I feel really frustrated, or whatever the words might have been at the time, and I don't want to say anything that I don't mean. And so I'm going to, like you said, go take a drink of water, or take a few breaths. It's different for everybody, but to really know that it's okay to tell your kids that, and that models, like you said, for them.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up because I do the same thing with my daughter and she's only 8 months. Like mommy needs a break, you know, she's gonna put you here in the stroller for a second, or you're gonna go with daddy for a second, and I'm gonna go just like freshen up my face or something, you know. But it's good that we model that we're humans too. You know, we're gonna get upset and we get frustrated. Um,
Exactly. Especially, I know for me, if I'm tired, not my boys are grown now, but if I was, if it was late at night and I was really tired, and I think that's the trigger for so many people. So really knowing it's okay to say that is the first place to begin. And we're going to talk about some specific examples. In fact, I've been following you on social media for a while, and I really, really liked and enjoyed and felt that the information you were giving was so helpful. And you did a post about this, which is what prompted me to reach out to you and say, what do you think about doing a show? Let's expand this and go deeper. But it really is, I think it's a great place to start in 2024. And I just want to say, before we begin with some examples, if you hear a phrase or words that we talk about today that you say or have said to your child, it doesn't mean you're a bad parent. It doesn't mean you've ruined your child forever. It's about recognizing that it might be a trend, and no matter how old your child is, to say, how can I change my words so that perhaps it is not as harmful? What are your thoughts about that?
yeah, it's very true. You know, it's hard to do that. Any change could be difficult, but it is very much feasible. And hopefully today, with what we talk about, will be a good starting point, like some little tips and pointers that can help you guys.
Absolutely. And if whether your child is 8 months old, like your daughter, or you have teenagers in your home, I believe it's never, ever too late to work on repairing a relationship and making it better.
Agreed.
So when we come back from our break, we're going to start sharing some common phrases that sometimes parents say that could be very harmful or hurtful, and what you can say instead, what we can say instead. We'll be right back. So in the first segment, Dr. Gacita, we talked about why it's important that we don't say certain kinds of phrases to our kids. And once again, if you hear yourself in some of the phrases we're about to talk about, this is not personal, and it doesn't mean you've done anything permanently harmful to your child. It's about recognizing, you know what, maybe I should stop saying that, and here are some things that I can say instead. And what I did was I took um, the list that you had on social media and I added to it, and we're going to go over some of those right now in a little bit more depth. And the first phrase that you had is, why can't you be more like? And the like could be your brother, your sister, your best friend, your cousin. Why is it important that parents not say those things?
Yeah. And this is something that I see and hear all the time, even when I see kiddos and parents here with me. It's really important that we try to say things that are different. I know it could be hard. When we say something like this to them, kids interpret this really differently. We might mean one thing, but kids internally, they're thinking other things. So when we're kind of comparing them, let's say to, I don't know, their older brother, for instance, right? We're kind of starting to take away what are the strengths of that child. Maybe your child is like super athletic and super smart. And by you kind of comparing them to another sibling, you're taking away that uniqueness, that strength that they might have, not on purpose at all, but the kid might start to feel that way. So eventually, the kid starts to not feel so good about themselves. So we start to see kids that struggle with their self-esteem, or kids that might feel a need to be perfect. Everything has to be perfect. So that way mom and dad or grandma can start, giving me some compliments. And eventually, if this is something that becomes more pervasive or more persistent, we see a lot of times kids who start to develop anxiety and even depression.
Right. It's a cycle. It really is a cycle. And so what could parents, if a parent is thinking that, they're thinking, why can't you just be more like your big brother, to use your example? What are some things that they could say to that child instead?
Yeah, great question. So I think it's important for us as parents to kind of acknowledge and celebrate the steps that they're taking to get to an outcome, right? We don't want to just focus on, oh, you got a B on your test, or oh, you got a D on your test. Why couldn't you do this? We want to celebrate, hey, I saw that you were really working hard. You were making little post-its, you were, sitting 30 minutes every day to study. We want to celebrate all those steps. To help them feel seen and heard by you. I think also telling kids to be their best, not the best, because we don't want them to be the best. We want them to be their best version of themselves, which, as we know, is different for every person, every teen, every child. And I think also a lot of kids, from my experience, a lot of times they tell me, I can't do this. I can't. So what I try to implement with families is, I can't do it yet. You will. Maybe you can't do it right now, but
Mhm.
you will. And those are kind of some tips of things that might help, instead of why can't you be like this? We want to focus on their strengths. So
Such great advice. And maybe to see what they need, maybe if it's, to use your example with school, maybe they need a tutor, maybe they really just don't understand. Maybe there's something bothering them. So I love what you just said about focusing on their strengths and really keeping their individuality in terms of what they've done well.
yeah.
Another phrase that is very common that we hear with parents is, you should be ashamed of yourself. Why
Hmm.
is that such a harmful thing for a parent or a grandparent to say to a child?
So I think sometimes what I've told parents is think about yourself in their shoes. Let's empathize with them for a second. You know, we are in our 20s, 30s, 40s, but picture yourself being like 10 years old and hearing this from your hero, right? Because your parents are like your supermodels, your heroes. And they tell you, I am so ashamed of you for doing this. Kids are not gonna, you know, feel wanted, or they might start to worry, do they love me because made them feel embarrassed, or you know, they're not happy with me. So kids can start to feel, sorry, um, like they're not worthy of maybe being in the family. They're not worthy of your love. They might start to feel like a burden. All not really good feelings to have, you know. So then we have the predicament again of falling into maybe having anxiety, depression, or other things. Substance use. There's a lot of different ways that this can go. Yeah.
Right, because what happens is kids learn to cope. They find coping mechanisms to try to help them to feel better. Now, it doesn't mean if you've ever said that to your child's going to turn to drugs. We're talking about
Yeah.
repeated kinds of, hearing those kinds of things. And so let's say the
Yeah.
parent is thinking that, the child just did something no matter what the age is. What could they say to their child instead?
Yeah. So, and I'm glad you brought that up. You know, not necessarily that this happens one time, your child is going to have anxiety or depression or substance. No, no, no. This is something, if this is all they hear all the time, like a consistent, pervasive pattern, this could happen. So I'm glad you brought that up. I think it's really important for parents to empathize with their kids, you know, kind of figure out how to set a limit with your kids without judging or criticizing them. Try to explore options to help them. So I could give you an example of something I hear a lot. You know, your kid loses a water bottle. I don't know, right? They're going to school, they lose a water bottle. You might lose it, like, oh, where did you put it? You always lose everything, you know. Which is normal because you're in a hurry, you're in a time crunch. You know, instead, what we could approach it differently is saying, hey, look, you know, you lost a water bottle. Let's think about where you could have put it. Where do you think you left it? And then maybe creating some sort of system where they check all their things before they leave, right? So you're not being judgy, we're not criticizing, we're empathizing and coming up with a solution. Um, we can also try asking our child, you know, what's making them feel this way, right? Sometimes kids will act out or externalize behaviors because there's something really going on. So I think it's really helpful to just tell them, hey, sounds like something's going on. Something made you really upset with your cousin, for
Mhm,
instance. You know, you want to go talk about it.
mhm.
That might be a I guess a better way to approach the situation, or just modeling. I know we were going to say that a lot throughout the show. Model, model, model. You are the one that they learn everything from. So, yeah, modeling
Exactly.
is, yeah,
And I love your focus on empathizing because that is such a big part of emotional intelligence and helping our children recognize that. Another thing that I know parents have done is depending on the age of the child, obviously, but asking the child to do some extra chores, or this is the second time you've lost your water bottle or whatever it is. You know what? We're going to ask you to help be responsible for that. That's not a punishment. It's real life. It's,
yeah,
everybody, might not be as responsible with something, a time here or there, but if it becomes a pattern, then, how can you in real life consequences show, we need to get another one. And, mom and dad just don't have the money to keep going and buying a new whatever. And so bringing them in and making them part of the solution is, it's a great plan. One of your other phrases that you had was, um, "You make me regret being a parent." Tell us about that
ouch,
one.
yeah, ouch. That's just, you know, what I would even envision the child feeling. You know, this is really, really damaging to say to our kids. It helps, it helps in no way, shape, or form. It creates a lot of feelings of anger that the child can start to build up. Kids can start to build a lot of resentment towards caregivers, regardless if it's mom, dad, grandma, auntie. Um, we start to see kiddos that don't start to feel loved. So again, you know, a lot of like those unworthy feelings. And eventually lose that connection with your child, which is the complete opposite of what we want,
Right.
The child eventually won't talk to you, won't want to keep you kind of in the loop of what's going on in their life. And it's because of this, they don't feel like worthy or loved from a statement like this.
Mm-hmm. So again, what can we say to our kids instead? If that's what's popping in our minds, if perhaps you're a parent and that's what you heard growing up, what's an alternative to what someone can say in that moment?
I think the first thing we have to do as parents is kind of check in with ourselves, right? So if you had a crappy day at work because it happens, or you got into an argument with someone, a spouse, which happens too, right? Kind of just take a minute or two to decompress. Stay calm, do what you got to do to kind of manage those feelings in a healthy way. Once you've done that, right? Um, I think it's really important that if you do say something like this, you repair and restore. So meaning you fix it, right? You apologize. A lot of times parents think, oh, they don't know what an apology is, or, what's the point? No, like we want to model that, right? We want to teach our kids that, hey, we make mistakes, we get upset and then we fix it. So an example would be, hey, Jimmy, I'm sorry, I lost my temper. Next time I'm going to take a moment to myself and maybe go count to 10, or I'm going to go take some deep breaths. Um, or if the child is doing something you're not in agreement with, hey, I don't know, Maria, I don't like when you behave like this, and give them an explanation, so they know what your expectations are from them, and they know, what behaviors are acceptable, and what behaviors can affect other people as well. So,
Right. And what they can do instead. So, what you said earlier, it's model,
yep.
model, model, and go back and, what you said, repair and restore. There's
Hmm.
nothing wrong with saying to your kids, you know what, I messed up and I didn't mean that and I'm so sorry. I think it's important. Another one on your list, and this one I have to tell you, this one hits home for me, and I'll tell you why after we talk about it a little bit. Stop being so oversensitive. Tell us about that, why that is could be so harmful or hurtful.
Yeah. I think it's important for us to remember, that some people feel feelings stronger than others, right? People being adults, kids, teens, whatever, we all feel differently. Um, it's important for us not to invalidate or minimize, because if we make a statement like that, then the child might feel like, man, they don't understand me, or they don't believe me, So what's going to happen eventually is kind of what we just spoke about in the previous one. You lose that connection with your child. Your child maybe won't even trust you because you don't understand them. Again, not because we want to, but this is just in their head what they internalize and the way that they see it. And I tell parents all the time, hey, remember, we used to be teens too, so how would we have wanted things to be
Mhm.
approached?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And one of the things I remember, not by my parents, but somebody else in my life when I was growing up, told me repeatedly, you're so oversensitive. And, I didn't know back then that I was an empath, and that's really
Oh,
a gift, and that I feel things that other people sometimes may not feel at the level that I feel them, but it's what has allowed me to be successful with families in the work that I do. And so just because you being whoever you are out there may not feel it at the level that your child does or your spouse does, doesn't mean that that's not how they interpret it, and it's not good or
yeah.
bad or right or wrong. It just is. So if a parent is feeling like their child is being so oversensitive, what could they say instead of that?
Yeah, so we want to learn to be validating and be supportive. So if your kid comes up to you and her friend, I don't know, doesn't want to be friends with her anymore. It happens all the time, all the time. We could say something like, hey, it sounds like, your friend's actions really hurt you. This relationship, this friendship was really important to you. What can I do to help? Or let's sit down and talk about it. Another thing that's really important is teaching kids how to regulate their feelings. We want to work with them together, teaching them, even when they're itty bitties. Hey, you seem embarrassed, you seem disappointed. Let's go do some coloring, and you can tell me what happened, or you can model with them. and take some deep breaths with them. There's a lot of different ways that you can do that with littles, so that they can learn when they're feeling a certain way. Yeah, you might feel feelings bigger, and you also have some tools that you can use to help you, kind of regulate and feel better.
Right.
And yeah.
And sitting and coloring with a young child is such a great way, because so many times the kids will open up when they're doing something like that. But with teenagers, with older kids, I know I have found, having them write in an interactive journal. So sometimes they'll write something and you can write back, or just having it privately. Do you agree with that for teenagers? And what other thoughts do you have about working with older kids like that?
Yeah, that's a wonderful recommendation, because teens, you're not going to sit and color. Well, you might, but
Yeah, they
with teens,
might.
it's a little, you might, but it's a little different. Journaling is a great option. And journaling, you could do it in so many ways. Like some kiddos don't like writing, so we could say, hey, look, do a voice memo to yourself, or hey, sit on a Google document and start typing, or write a song, about what you're feeling. Like there's a lot of different ways. A lot of teenagers like going for a walk, or go for a drive, you know, maybe go for a drive with them and to somewhere that they might like, so they don't feel trapped in the car and they have to talk about it. Just a very
Right.
nonchalant atmosphere to help them. Yeah.
Right. Even regular activities like, hey, come make dinner with me, or
Hmm.
like giving the child the chance. And I've always found that when a child is upset or lashing out, there's always a reason. There's always a root cause. Another thing that sometimes kids hear parents say is, "You're too young to understand anything." Tell us your thoughts about that.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes kids are going to be young to understand at our level, right? So maybe an 11-year-old can't understand at a 40-year-old level, right? But there's a lot of ways that you can explain things to kids at an age appropriate manner. Um, we want to be able to explain things to kids. We want them to be able to learn how to have an opinion and share their opinions. We want them to learn they can make choices. Um, we want them to ask questions. You want them to explore and be curious. And we want them to trust us, right? That's the end goal. We don't want kids going to Google or going to, their friend to ask them things that are important. We hope that they come to us. So by doing all these things and hopefully being open to sharing with them things at age appropriate level, that can help.
Right.
Um,
And really, we're it's just a big giant put down to say, well, you're too young to understand, because um, you know, the age of a child may not be a direct correlation to their maturity level. And even if they are still so young, they may feel so confident that they feel like they understand. And then we just, that just knocks them down. The last one we're going to do today, Dr. Gacita, is, "That's not how you do it. Let me show you how." What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah. I think a lot of us as parents, we have that need, that urge, like, okay, no, let me do it. Okay, no, let me do it. Because we just want to help. Um, I think that it's important for us to keep in mind we want our children to be independent. So if we start doing all the things for them, they eventually might feel like, I can't do it. I need help. So we don't want that. We want them to feel confident in themselves that they can do these things. And there's different ways that we can approach that, simply by acknowledging what they're feeling or what's happening. So an example of this could be, hey, Timmy, I see that you're getting frustrated. Let's take a deep breath and we're going to try this again. Or hey, I see that you're working really hard on this and putting this together. So you're recognizing what they're doing and you're acknowledging and validating what they're feeling. So
Mhm. So
yeah.
it's that validation, it's that acknowledging whatever you're saying to your child. And I encourage you, ask your child, say, I saw this show, and the host and the psychologist were talking about things that might feel hurtful to a child. Are there things that you ever hear me say or your other parents say that might feel hurtful to you? Ask them. And so once again, there are other things. Leave me alone. I'm just going to leave you here. I mean, we could go on and on with probably, hundreds of other phrases, but unfortunately we don't have the time for that. And so What our big goal is here is not to address every single possibility of what could be said, but to say, you know what, be aware, be sensitive to the things that as parents that we are saying to our kids, and to stop and say, wait a minute, maybe that is harmful or hurtful and will become the voice that they hear in their head. And that's not what we want. And so, speaking of other parents, Dr. Gacita, we have two questions from parents that have been written in. And after the break, I'm going to ask you those questions on their behalf. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the part of the show where we hear from you, our viewers. I like to call it your parenting destination. And our first question for you today, Dr. Gacita, is from Millie H. in Hartford, Connecticut. And Millie said, I try so hard not to yell at my children ages 5 and 8 or to say negative things that are probably pretty hurtful. But I find that when I'm frustrated or upset, these things just come flying out of my mouth. Then I lay awake at night feeling so terrible that I said what I said. Do you have any advice for how I can break this habit? And we kind of already talked about that, but what else would you like to add?
I just want to normalize, Millie, that we all lose our cool. We all do this. I think that you're ahead of the game here. Like you recognize what's happening. Now it's just kind of taking, okay, what are the best steps I can take? And it's kind of what we talked about already. Acknowledging what you're feeling, giving yourself a break or a timeout. Um, you know, figuring out what works for you. If it's taking deep breaths, going to clean your face for a little bit, just taking a couple minutes for yourself, self-care, so that we're able to maintain composure when we do get frustrated, because we all do. um and I think we talked also about kind of modeling and apologizing for our own misbehaviors. That way our kids can learn how to do that too, because sometimes we want our kids to apologize for what they did, but sometimes we forget that they don't know how to, so if we model that, that'll help them down the line. And always,
Right.
of course, reassuring that you love them regardless of what happens, I think, is
Right.
important.
And taking ownership, and then like you said, they'll show that, like, I did this, I was wrong, and for the child to be able to do that as well as they grow. So, Millie, I hope that helps. And our second question today is from Tara K from Sandy, Utah. And Tara writes, and she has something in common with you here. She also has an 8-month-old baby girl. And she said, I was raised by parents who never missed a chance to tell me everything I was doing that was wrong. And I feel like I'm not sure how else to parent other than what I experienced. I don't want my daughter to feel the way about me when she grows up that I feel about my parents. It's that parenting cycle again that we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
What beginning steps do you recommend for me to learn how to point out the positive and not the negative with my daughter? And you already really talked about this so beautifully, but is there anything else you'd like to add?
um I mean, first, congrats on your little one. It's such a magical time. I think that we touched on these things. Again, modeling. We got to train our brains to we're kind of like rewiring our brains, so that we can pick out the positive. We're just catching them. You're like the police officer for the good. You want to catch them being good. So saying things like, thank you for waiting patiently, while I made your milk, something age appropriate for your little one. If needed down the line, if this is something you need to further process, always getting additional support can be helpful, and it can help you process, your upbringing, and also kind of create a vision of what your life is going to be like with baby girl.
Right. And use it as a teachable moment. I agree with you completely. Tell them what they did was right. And you could even, parents out there, use it as a way to encourage positive character traits. So when you said about, you gave me your plate or whatever the example was, wow, you used responsibility by handing me your plate so carefully that it didn't drop on the floor. You used responsibility by doing what it was you were supposed to do. And so just keep building on that. And if you have any specifics, Dr. Gacita is going to be sharing how people can follow her on social media. And so let's go ahead and do that right now because we are almost out of time. How can people find you, learn more about you, your website, your social media, and anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, so I have my website and my Instagram are the same thing. So it's Healing Wings LLC. My website has more information about what I do and my services, and my Instagram, my social media has a lot of free pointers about a lot of different topics. So please feel free to join, learn some anxiety tools or just ways to know if somebody's going through something, just different tips for free
Right.
that you
And
can take
and
away.
yes, and your information is excellent. That's what led me to you in the first place. And really,
Thank you.
I think the thing that I would like to leave people with is we didn't use this word, but it's what you've been saying. Create the awareness of what am I saying? How can I help myself not to react, but to be proactive so that your child will grow up and have that tight bond and trust you and communicate with you. And I just cannot thank you enough for coming, Dr. Gacita. And I'd like to close our show today with a quote from you. It's actually a quote from Dr. Jane Nelson, one of my heroes. She's a psychologist and author, and she's been doing this for a very long time. And your quote from her is this: children will listen to you after they feel listened to. Sums up beautifully what we've talked about. Thank you again for joining us on Parenting GPS.